You think you know a woman. You see her graying hair, the lines etched by time around her eyes, the gentle smile that masks a lifetime of unspoken truths. You see the comfortable silence she holds, the quiet dignity of a well-lived life. But what if that silence is a meticulously crafted fortress, and behind those seemingly kind eyes lies a mind relentlessly mapping out an intricate, devastating plan? What if the woman they dismissed as a relic, a fading ornament from a bygone era, was actually the unseen architect of their ruin, patiently waiting for the perfect moment to strike? This isn't just a story of heartbreak and betrayal. It's a deep dive into the chilling patience of a woman scorned, a masterclass in quiet vengeance that no one, absolutely no one, will see coming. And the first domino, barely a whisper on the wind, is about to fall. At 74, Eleanor Hayes was a creature of unwavering routine, a rhythm so precise it could set a clock. Every morning, precisely at 6:30 a.m., she'd be in her sun-drenched kitchen, the aroma of her specialized herbal tea, a blend of lavender, chamomile, and a hint of ginger, mingling with the crisp, dewy air of Riverside. By 7 a.m., her nimble, though aged, hands would be expertly pruning the prize-winning hybrid tea roses in her sprawling garden, each snip a testament to her meticulous nature. These rituals were her anchors, the comforting, predictable framework of a life that, on the surface, appeared unburdened. But beneath that perfectly calm exterior, a slow, methodical current had been gathering strength for nearly a decade, a tide of purpose that would soon engulf everything. This was not a sudden surge of anger, but a glacial shift, years in the making, and all the more dangerous for its deliberate pace. The summons arrived on a humid Tuesday in late August, not through the impersonal efficiency of the postal service, but delivered by hand. A sleek, unervingly self-assured young man in a bespoke charcoal suit, barely out of law school, materialized on her cobblestone path. He radiated an air of polished entitlement that grated on Eleanor's nerves, a stark contrast to the quiet dignity of her home. He introduced himself as Brandon Cole, a junior associate from Hayes and Thompson, Arthur's newly rebranded and seemingly invincible law firm. "Mrs. Hayes," he began, his voice perfectly modulated, a tone practiced for maximum corporate impact. "I'm here on behalf of Mr. Arthur Thompson. We regret to inform you that, following a recent and extensive financial audit of the firm's assets and liabilities, your existing alimony agreement will be subject to immediate and substantial revision. A necessary adjustment, you understand, in these volatile market conditions." He handed her an envelope, thick and cream-colored, its heavy paper stock and embossed firm logo a painful reminder of Arthur's enduring wealth and his subtle, infuriating control. Eleanor's fingers, still carrying the faint scent of rose petals, felt the chilling weight of the document. Adjustment. Revision. The words were carefully chosen, devoid of any genuine meaning, yet pregnant with a veiled threat. They meant only one thing: control, a final, tightening turn of the screw. Arthur was asserting his dominance from afar, a distant, unseen hand reaching out to diminish her. Eleanor merely nodded, her expression as tranquil and unreadable as the surface of a still pond. Brandon Cole seemed visibly flustered by her utter lack of reaction, perhaps anticipating tears, or at least a flutter of indignant protest. He cleared his throat, adjusting his tie nervously. "Mr. Thompson understands this may be an inconvenience, Mrs. Hayes," he continued, his voice losing a fraction of its practiced composure, "but the firm is undergoing unforeseen market corrections. A necessary measure to ensure its long-term viability and protect our esteemed clientele." A practiced smile, thin and unconvincing, stretched across his lips. "He hopes for your understanding during this challenging period." He hoped for her understanding. The sheer audacity of the phrase almost made Eleanor chuckle, a dry, bitter sound that she wisely kept trapped behind her polite smile. Understanding was a commodity Arthur had never extended to her, not in their 28 years of marriage, and certainly not in the 7 years since their spectacularly public divorce. She knew this wasn't about understanding, it was about humiliation. He wanted to see her squirm, to watch her scramble, to force her to call, to beg. But Eleanor, they would soon discover, had long since mastered the art of playing a different game, on a board Arthur didn't even know existed. She closed the heavy oak door calmly after Brandon Cole left, the profound silence in her sunroom suddenly amplifying, almost humming with an unseen energy. The document, clutched in her hand, felt not like a burden, but like a burning coal, igniting a familiar, cold resolve. She walked to her antique writing desk, a cherished piece inherited from her grandmother, its polished mahogany surface reflecting the morning light, and laid the papers out with deliberate precision. The terms were brutal. Her monthly alimony, a modest sum barely enough to cover her quiet, independent lifestyle, was to be reduced by a staggering 70%. The explanation, a tangled web of financial jargon and corporate speak, was clearly designed to confuse and intimidate. Reduced to minimal statutory requirements due to unforeseen economic climate shifts and necessary firm-wide cost reevaluations. It was a transparent lie, of course. Arthur Thompson, her ex-husband, now 72, was not merely a successful lawyer. He was a titan in the legal world, his firm a sprawling empire of wealth and influence. This wasn't about financial hardship on his part. It was a deliberate, malicious act of cruelty, a final, calculated humiliation designed to remind her of her perceived place. The truth of their divorce, 7 years prior, had been a whispered scandal that ripped through their affluent suburb like a wildfire. Arthur, then 65, had left Eleanor, 67, for a woman barely 40, a dazzling, ruthlessly ambitious lawyer named Scarlett Vance. He'd meticulously spun a public narrative of irreconcilable differences, a tired marriage that had simply run its course, and his courageous need for a fresh start, with someone who truly understood his drive and shared his boundless ambition. The town, captivated by the drama and the allure of Arthur's wealth, had largely sided with him, casting Eleanor as the sympathetic but ultimately forgotten victim, the quiet, dignified wife who simply couldn't keep up. No one, absolutely no one, knew the true cost of that narrative, the profound depth of the sacrifices Eleanor had made, the silent battles she'd fought within the gilded cage of their outwardly perfect life. They thought she grieved, she strategized. Arthur's meteoric rise to prominence had never been a solo act. It was a meticulously choreographed ballet, with Eleanor as his invisible, indispensable choreographer. He was the charming face, the brilliant orator in the courtroom, the man who captivated juries, but she was the tireless architect behind the scenes, the one who meticulously researched, tirelessly edited, and strategically analyzed. For 3 decades, she'd been his unofficial legal researcher, his strategic advisor, his unwavering emotional anchor. While he was out dazzling clients and winning high-profile cases, Eleanor was at home, long after their children were asleep, often until the early hours of the morning, poring over dense legal briefs, cross-referencing obscure precedents in forgotten law libraries, drafting intricate memos, and, most crucially, pinpointing the exact, exploitable weaknesses in opposing arguments. She remembered one case with chilling clarity, the infamous Bayview Heights property dispute. It was Arthur's first truly landmark triumph, the case that catapulted him into the upper echelons of the legal elite. He'd been on the verge of losing a multi-million-dollar land claim for a powerful, notoriously ruthless real estate developer. Arthur was stressed, irritable, convinced it was a dead end. He'd brought home boxes of documents, throwing them onto their study floor in frustration. It was Eleanor, meticulously sifting through stacks of old zoning maps, forgotten municipal permits, and obscure land deeds late into the night, who discovered a crucial, overlooked clause from a 1950s municipal code. That single, obscure piece of information, buried deep within a forgotten archive, turned the entire case around, resulting in a monumental victory for Arthur and his firm, securing their financial future and cementing his reputation as a legal genius. He accepted the accolades, the enormous bonuses, the glowing features in prestigious legal magazines, while Eleanor watched from the sidelines, a silent, unacknowledged partner in his triumph. Her only reward was the quiet, profound satisfaction of knowing her intellect had secured his success, her sharp mind the true engine of his fame. She was the invisible foundation upon which he built his towering career, the steady, unseen current beneath his magnificent ship. And now he was attempting to capsize her, expecting her to drown, completely unaware that Eleanor, they would soon discover, not only knew how to breathe underwater, but thrive in the crushing depths. The game, he thought, was over. It had, in fact, just begun. The first call came not from Arthur, as he expected, but from her son, Thomas. At 42, Thomas was a kind, almost scholarly man, teaching history at the local high school. He'd always been the more sensitive of her two children, keenly attuned to the unspoken tensions that hummed beneath the surface of their outwardly perfect family. His voice, usually calm and measured, was tight with barely suppressed anger. "Mom," he began, without preamble, "I just heard about the alimony. Dad's being completely unreasonable, isn't he? What in the world is he thinking?" He was caught in the middle, still loyal to both parents, yet increasingly disillusioned with his father's actions, a disillusionment Eleanor had subtly fostered over the years. Eleanor, ever composed, reassured him with vague platitudes, telling him it was merely a temporary financial adjustment and that she would handle it. She heard the hesitation in his voice, the unspoken desire to do something, anything, but he was powerless, caught in a trap of his own filial duty. Her daughter, Sarah, a sharp, no-nonsense executive at a national advertising firm, called shortly after, her voice a rapid-fire volley of questions and directives. At 47, Sarah had inherited Arthur's ambition and his pragmatic, results-oriented worldview. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You need to fight this, immediately. Get a bulldog lawyer, go to the press, blast him. Don't just let him walk all over you." Sarah saw the world in terms of battles won and lost, and for her, this was an unacceptable surrender. Eleanor calmly repeated her assurance. She was exploring all options, a phrase as opaque and unyielding as granite. Sarah, frustrated by her mother's stoicism, sighed, a sharp, impatient sound. "Just don't let him win, Mom. Please, make him pay." Eleanor allowed herself a small, internal smile. Winning was precisely her intention. But her definition of victory, and the currency in which it would be paid, was far more nuanced and devastating than Sarah could possibly imagine. The very next day, Eleanor picked up the phone and dialed a number she hadn't used in years. On the other end was Evelyn Reed, a formidable, silver-haired legal luminary who, at 76, was more legend than lawyer. Evelyn, a distant cousin of Eleanor's late mother, was known for her brutal efficiency in the courtroom, her razor-sharp intellect, and her unwavering, almost fierce, loyalty to her female clients. Eleanor, Evelyn's voice, though softened by age, still held a steely edge, a hint of the legal bulldog she truly was. "I'd heard whispers. Arthur Thompson is truly a piece of work, isn't he? What can I do for you, dear? I assume this isn't a social call." Eleanor didn't mince words. Her voice was calm, almost conversational, yet it carried the weight of decades. "Evelyn, this isn't about alimony anymore. This is about an old debt. A very old debt that needs to be settled. And I need your help to collect on it. Every last penny." Evelyn was silent for a long moment, a deep, knowing chuckle finally rumbling through the phone line. "My kind of case, Eleanor. Tell me everything. And don't leave out a single, delicious detail." They met in Evelyn's discreet, wood-paneled office in downtown Riverside, a sanctuary of legal might and hushed power. The office, filled with towering bookshelves overflowing with leather-bound legal tomes, smelled faintly of old paper and victory. Eleanor laid out the facts, not just the recent alimony cut, but the meticulously detailed history of her decades of silent contribution, the countless hours of legal research, the strategic insights that had fueled Arthur's meteoric career, the obscure precedents she'd unearthed, the briefs she'd edited, the late nights spent organizing his chaotic files. She spoke with a quiet precision that left no room for doubt, recalling dates, names, and case numbers with the photographic memory of an archivist. She brought up the infamous Bayview Heights property dispute, the seemingly insignificant municipal code she'd unearthed, and the precise, unethical details of how that information was used, and, crucially, how much damaging information was deliberately withheld from the public record. Evelyn listened, her eyes, sharp behind her elegant, half-moon spectacles, never leaving Eleanor's face, her fingers occasionally tapping a rhythmic beat on her polished desk. When Eleanor finished, a profound silence filled the room, broken only by the distant hum of city traffic and the soft whir of the air conditioning. "Eleanor," Evelyn finally said, her voice filled with a quiet reverence, a hint of awe, "this isn't just a simple case. This is a master key. This could dismantle everything Arthur Thompson has built. This is magnificent. And utterly, brutally brilliant." Over the next few weeks, Eleanor and Evelyn embarked on a meticulous, almost surgical, forensic excavation of Arthur's entire professional past. Eleanor, with the precision of a seasoned librarian, produced box after box of dusty, yellowed files from her basement, what Arthur had always dismissively called her old papers. Among them were his earliest work notes, discarded drafts of legal briefs, and, most damningly, carbon copies of internal firm memos from the Bayview Heights case. These were documents Arthur had considered insignificant or had simply forgotten, carelessly leaving them behind in his hurried departure. Now they were a goldmine. These memos, along with Eleanor's meticulously detailed personal journals from those very years, revealed a shocking, undeniable truth. Arthur had not merely won the Bayview Heights case through clever lawyering. He had deliberately and systematically suppressed crucial information that would have exposed a deeper, systemic pattern of fraud and corruption within the powerful real estate development company he was representing. He hadn't just won the case. He had orchestrated a partial victory, strategically protecting the larger, more lucrative interests of his powerful client at the expense of full justice for the affected community. His celebrated triumph was built on a deliberate, unethical compromise, a calculated act of professional malfeasance. Evelyn's legal team, a formidable cadre of sharp, young associates, energized by the prospect of such a high-profile, ethically charged case, moved with surgical precision. They began by filing a series of aggressive, seemingly unrelated motions, not to challenge the alimony reduction, but to demand a comprehensive and immediate financial audit of Hayes and Thompson. These motions cited suspicious discrepancies and potential irregularities uncovered during preliminary investigations, a brilliant legal smokescreen crafted by Evelyn. Arthur's firm, initially confident in their untouchable legal position, dismissed these as frivolous, typical tactics of a scorned ex-wife seeking revenge. They made a fatal error. They underestimated Eleanor's quiet resolve and Evelyn's legendary legal prowess. They believed they were dealing with a predictable opponent. They were, in fact, stepping into a trap laid by a patient, unseen predator. The local legal community, a notoriously gossipy and competitive Shark Tank, began to buzz. Evelyn Reed, a legend in her own right, didn't file frivolous motions. If Evelyn was digging, there was something significant, something potentially devastating, buried beneath. Whispers began to circulate, quiet at first, then growing louder, about Eleanor Hayes's mysterious comeback and Evelyn Reed's unusual interest in an old divorce case. The local investigative reporter, David Sterling, a tenacious, relentless journalist known for his unflinching pursuit of corruption, caught wind of the whispers. He was a veteran, hardened by years of breaking difficult stories, and his instincts told him there was more to this than a mere alimony dispute. He reached out to Evelyn, who, with Eleanor's silent, knowing approval, granted him a carefully orchestrated, off-the-record interview, dropping tantalizing hints about decades of hidden truths, compromised justice, and the real cost of legal glory. The fuse, meticulously crafted over years, had been lit. The first tremor was about to become a seismic shift. Arthur, for the first time in decades, began to show visible cracks in his perfectly polished veneer. His phone calls to Eleanor, once rare and condescending, now became alarmingly frequent and frantic, often late into the night. His tone, once filled with thinly veiled threats and pompous indignation, now shifted to blustering accusations, laced with a growing undertone of desperation. "Eleanor, what in God's name are you doing?" he'd bellow into the phone, his voice hoarse with fury. "This is insanity. You're trying to destroy my firm, my reputation. You're a vindictive, hateful old woman who can't let go." He still believed she was acting purely out of malice, a spiteful ex-wife seeking simple revenge. He had no idea she was acting with cold, calculating precision, executing a plan conceived years ago. Eleanor never replied. Every call, every angry voicemail, every desperate email was simply forwarded to Evelyn, a quiet, damning affirmation that the trap was tightening, the walls closing in. She knew his escalating desperation was a definitive sign that he was finally, truly vulnerable, exposed, and losing control. The intricate web she had spun, thread by silent thread, was complete. Now it was time to watch him struggle within its inescapable grasp. His fall, when it came, would be spectacular. And the world, eager for a juicy scandal involving the rich and powerful, would be watching. The first public tremor wasn't a seismic shock, but a quiet, insidious hum, a subtle vibration that hinted at deeper instabilities. It began with a meticulously placed, anonymous tip to David Sterling, the very journalist who had caught wind of the whispers surrounding Evelyn's involvement. Not a direct accusation, mind you, but a whisper, a suggestion that the very bedrock of Arthur Thompson's celebrated career was not as solid as it appeared. David, a sharp-eyed, tenacious investigative journalist in his late 30s, was known for his unwavering skepticism and his relentless ability to dig for uncomfortable truths. He didn't bite immediately, he never did. But the seed, carefully cultivated by Evelyn and Eleanor, was firmly planted. Rebecca had ensured the tip was just tantalizing enough to pique his interest, yet vague enough to protect our anonymity. We were playing a long, drawn-out game, one that demanded infinite patience and surgical precision. Every delay, every subtle move, was a thread in the web. While Mr. Sterling began his quiet, almost imperceptible digging, Arthur, completely oblivious to the impending earthquake, escalated his clumsy, predictable attempts to strong-arm me. His lawyers, now overtly hostile, filed a motion to reduce my alimony even further, citing lack of cooperation and unreasonable demands in my refusal to simply accept his proposed adjustments. They brazenly portrayed me as a greedy, vindictive ex-wife, desperately trying to squeeze every last penny from a struggling firm. The local papers, always eager for a juicy human interest angle, ravenously picked up the story, eagerly casting me as the villain in their simplistic drama. Thompson's ex-wife's alimony cut, one particularly gaudy headline blared, accompanied by a truly unflattering photo of me taken years ago, chosen, no doubt, for maximum negative impact. Elderly woman clings to old money as prestigious firm struggles. It was exactly what Arthur wanted: public sympathy for himself, public scorn for me, a convenient smokescreen to distract from his own machinations. But I knew this was merely the shallow, sensationalized prologue to a much deeper, much darker truth. My children, however, were becoming increasingly uneasy, caught in the swirling currents of media speculation and their father's narrative. Thomas, my sensitive son, called, his voice tight with genuine concern, bordering on distress. "Mom, have you seen the papers? What's going on? Dad says you're being utterly unreasonable, that you're actively trying to ruin him and his firm." He was visibly struggling, caught between two fiercely conflicting narratives, desperately trying to reconcile the gentle, kind mother he knew with the ruthless, vindictive image painted in the media. "Thomas," I said gently, my voice radiating a calm that belied the storm within, "some stories, dear, are far more complicated than the headlines suggest. Sometimes, the true story, the one that truly matters, takes time to reveal itself. A long, painful time." I heard his heavy sigh, a sound laden with profound doubt and filial anguish. He wanted to believe me, but the public narrative was powerful, relentless. My daughter, Sarah, pragmatic and fiercely protective, was far more direct, her words sharp and accusatory. "Mom, this is ridiculous. You need to fight back immediately. This is damaging your reputation. Everyone thinks you're being vindictive and spiteful, just trying to cause trouble." She saw the situation purely through the lens of public perception and strategic response, urging me to engage in a war of words I had no intention of fighting. "Perhaps," I replied, my voice steady, betraying no emotion, "but sometimes, Sarah, the greatest battles are not fought with words, but in silence, with the truth as your most potent weapon. And the truth, my dear, is often a slow-burning fuse." She didn't understand, not yet. Her mind, so accustomed to immediate gratification and direct confrontation, couldn't fathom the long, patient game I was playing. But the seeds of doubt, of discomfort with her father's escalating aggression, were being meticulously sown in her mind, too. The legal dance between Evelyn and Arthur's firm intensified, a brutal, sophisticated ballet of motions and countermotions. Rebecca, a phantom limb of my own unyielding determination, filed a series of aggressive countermotions, not to dispute the alimony cut directly, but to demand comprehensive and immediate financial disclosures from Arthur's entire legal empire. Hayes and Thompson. She cited anomalies in their reported earnings, unexplained discrepancies in their expense reports, and potential ethical conflicts uncovered during preliminary investigations, a brilliant legal smokescreen designed by Evelyn to divert their attention from the true target. Arthur's firm, initially confident in their untouchable legal position, dismissed these as frivolous, nothing more than the desperate, spiteful tactics of a scorned ex-wife. They made a fatal, arrogant error. They dismissed me, Eleanor Hayes, and my formidable, silent partner, Evelyn Reed. They believed they were dealing with a predictable opponent. They were, in fact, stepping into an intricately designed trap, baited over decades by a patient, unseen predator. Slowly, painstakingly, the firm's meticulously constructed financial facade began to crack under Evelyn's relentless pressure. What began as minor disclosures escalated into subpoenas, then into full-blown court orders for access to their internal ledgers, their client records, their very financial heart. Whispers began to circulate more widely in legal circles, a quiet buzz of unease transforming into a deafening roar. Evelyn Reed, a legend in her own right, didn't file frivolous motions for mere alimony disputes. If Evelyn was digging this deep, there was something significant, something potentially devastating, buried beneath. Lawyers, always the most voracious of gossips, began to whisper about Eleanor Hayes's mysterious, relentless comeback and Evelyn Reed's chilling interest in an old divorce case that somehow turned into a full-scale corporate investigation. The ground beneath Arthur's feet, once so solid, began to shift ominously. Then came the first major jolt, the first visible crack in Arthur's carefully constructed public image, Sarah Jenkins' investigative piece. It wasn't on the front page of the New York Times, not yet. It was a meticulously researched, damning article published in a respected online legal journal, a publication read by every serious lawyer and journalist in the country. Titled The Hidden Costs of Corporate Success, a forensic look at Hayes and Thompson's early triumphs, it didn't directly accuse Arthur of criminal activity. Instead, it subtly but devastatingly questioned the very ethical foundation of his firm's early, celebrated victories, hinting at aggressive tactics, unusual evidentiary omissions, and unexplained financial windfalls. In the infamous Bayview Heights property dispute, it didn't point fingers, but it laid out the facts, the timelines, the missing documents, the very pieces of information I had meticulously preserved from my old papers. It was subtle, academic, yet utterly devastating to anyone who understood the intricate, often murky, inner workings of the legal world. The article, a masterpiece of journalistic restraint and implied condemnation, sparked a quiet firestorm in the legal community. The bait had been swallowed. The hook was set. Arthur, for the first time in decades, seemed genuinely rattled. His phone calls to me, once a torrent of angry threats, now ceased abruptly. Instead, I began receiving frantic, rambling, late-night emails, no longer from his lawyers, but directly from Arthur himself. They were unhinged, rambling accusations, filled with a raw desperation that was almost pitiable. He accused me of trying to destroy him, of being a venomous old woman who simply couldn't let go of the past, of being obsessed with revenge. He threatened to expose my secrets that didn't exist, figments of his own guilt-ridden imagination, projections of his own crumbling reality. I deleted them all without reading past the first few lines, never replying, never acknowledging his frantic cries for attention. He was reacting, not thinking. He was losing control. The plan was working, precisely as I had foreseen. The slow, patient unwinding of his life was accelerating. The web, spun so silently, was now taut, ready to snap. The climax of the quiet storm was not a sudden explosion, but a meticulously timed implosion, already set in motion. The climax of the quiet storm arrived not in a dramatic courtroom showdown, nor in a sensationalized press conference, but in a small, sterile conference room on the top floor of Hayes and Thompson's once imposing skyscraper. The air, usually thick with the scent of polished wood and expensive coffee, now hung heavy with unspoken tension, tinged with the metallic tang of fear. Arthur, looking noticeably older than his 72 years, his once impeccable tailored suit now rumpled and ill-fitting, sat opposite me at the gleaming mahogany table. His face, usually a mask of impenetrable confidence, was a roadmap of sleepless nights and gnawing anxiety. The deep lines around his eyes weren't from laughter, but from worry. Bethany Dubois, his dazzling younger partner, was conspicuously, almost insultingly, absent, her flight from the sinking ship a silent, eloquent testament to her shallow loyalties. Arthur's legal team, a formidable trio of grim-faced, tight-lipped lawyers who once radiated power, now looked like pallbearers, their shoulders slumped with the weight of impending defeat. Rebecca, my own formidable legal bulldog, sat beside me, her expression a mask of polite, almost bored indifference, her gaze occasionally drifting to the panoramic view of the city's skyline, as if the entire proceeding was a minor distraction from her more important schedule. David Sterling, the tenacious journalist, sat quietly in a corner, almost invisible, his notebook open, his pen poised, a silent, predatory observer. The humming of the air conditioning unit seemed unnaturally loud in the suffocating silence. Rebecca began, her voice calm, clear, and utterly devoid of emotion, outlining the results of our reevaluation of Arthur's entire professional career, not just the early cases. She presented the suppressed memos, the internal emails, the complete, unvarnished version of the story behind the Bayview Heights property dispute, Arthur's supposed greatest triumph. She meticulously laid out the damning evidence, each document a precisely aimed bullet in the heart of his reputation, his career, his carefully constructed life. The undeniable proof that he had not merely engaged in questionable ethics, but had knowingly and repeatedly committed professional misconduct, actively subverting justice for personal gain, covering up corporate malfeasance that had affected countless lives. Her narrative was precise, irrefutable, meticulously pieced together from the old papers Arthur had so carelessly dismissed, from the faint carbon copies he never imagined would resurface. Each revelation was a nail in the coffin of his standing, his name, his very identity. She detailed how he had knowingly suppressed evidence, allowed a powerful development company to escape full accountability, effectively trading the complete justice of his clients for his own meteoric rise and the firm's burgeoning wealth. This was not just a disbarment offense. This was a career-ending, legacy-destroying revelation, a moral bankruptcy laid bare for all to see. Arthur's face, once so arrogant and self-assured, crumbled before my eyes. The color drained from his cheeks, leaving a pasty, sickly pallor. His gaze, once so piercing, darted around the room, desperately seeking an escape route, a denial, a loophole. But there was none. He looked like a man watching his entire life's work, his meticulously built empire, disintegrate into dust before his very eyes. The truth, in all its devastating, unyielding glory, was finally laid bare. He had built his kingdom on lies, on omissions, on the quiet, unseen efforts of others, and I, the silent, discarded architect, was now demolishing it, brick by agonizing brick, piece by excruciating piece. He finally turned his gaze to me, his eyes filled not with anger or hatred, but with a raw, profound, chilling despair. It was the look of a man who knew he was utterly, irretrievably lost. "Eleanor," he whispered, his voice broken, barely audible. Why? Why are you doing this? After everything we had." And there it was. The moment he finally saw me, not as the background character, the comfortable chapter, the pitying ex-wife, but as the true author of his downfall. The revenge was not in the victory, not in the public humiliation, not even in the money, which was, by this point, a mere footnote. The true currency of my vengeance was in the quiet, devastating revelation that I had always held the power, the knowledge, the true levers of his success. He had just been too blind, too arrogant, too self-absorbed to ever see it. His miscalculation had been catastrophic. "Because, Arthur," I said, my voice clear, steady, and utterly devoid of triumph, a quiet steel that cut through the silence, "you forgot one thing. I wasn't just your wife. I was your partner. Your silent partner. I knew where all your secrets were buried, because I helped you bury them. And partners," I paused, letting the weight of the word hang in the air, "don't abandon each other without a settlement. They collect their dues." The truth, the full, unvarnished truth of his calculated deception, of his profound ethical compromises, was about to become public, thanks to David Sterling's poised pen, waiting to deliver the final, crushing blow. His carefully constructed legacy, his entire career, his very identity as a powerful, respected lawyer, would be exposed for what it was, a meticulously built house of cards, erected on my unseen efforts and his profound moral failings. And the world was about to watch it fall, in a spectacular, unforgettable collapse. This was not just payback, this was the brutal, undeniable truth, finally claiming its due. And it had only just begun. The articles began to appear with a relentless, almost brutal frequency, not just in legal journals, but splashed across the front pages of major newspapers, dominating national news broadcasts, and trending on every major news site. "Legal Lion Falls, Arthur Thompson disbarred, implicated in decades-old cover-up," screamed one headline, its bold type a stark declaration of his downfall. "The Hidden Price of Justice, Scandal Rocks Hayes and Thompson," read another, detailing the cascading fallout. David Sterling, the investigative journalist, had done his work with meticulous precision, presenting the damning evidence I'd given him with devastating clarity and undeniable impact. The old papers Arthur had so arrogantly dismissed as worthless, the discarded drafts and internal memos, were now priceless evidence, each document a hammer blow to his reputation, his career, his very name. His world, built on arrogance, ambition, and deceit, imploded with a speed that was both terrifying and breathtaking. Hayes and Thompson, the once unassailable partnership, fractured under the immense pressure of crippling lawsuits, regulatory investigations, and a rapidly disintegrating client base. The firm dissolved, its former partners fleeing the sinking ship, eager to distance themselves from the radioactive scandal. Arthur, stripped of his license, his professional standing, and his network of influence, was not only disbarred, but became a pariah in the legal community, a cautionary tale whispered in hushed tones. His once loyal clients, horrified by the revelations, abandoned him en masse. His carefully cultivated network of contacts vanished overnight. Bethany Dubois, true to her opportunistic nature, evaporated as quickly as she had appeared, taking with her what little was left of his dwindling liquid assets, leaving him utterly alone in the sprawling Elm Street mansion, now an empty, echoing shell of his former glory. My children reacted in ways that were both predictable and profoundly painful, each grappling with the shattering of their illusions. Thomas, my empathetic son, found the entire affair profoundly disturbing, a moral earthquake that shook his foundational beliefs. He called me constantly, his voice heavy with a new, somber understanding, tinged with a quiet grief he couldn't articulate. "Mom," he'd say, his voice strained, I can't believe Dad did that. All those years. I just never knew. It's like I didn't know him at all." He grieved not just for the public loss of his father's reputation, but for the painful shattering of the idealized image he'd held since childhood. He came to my home, not just for a dutiful visit, but to talk, to truly listen, for the first time in years, desperate to understand the seismic shift in his family's narrative. We sat in my sunroom, bathed in the soft, forgiving light, surrounded by my thriving orchids, and I told him parts of the truth I'd kept hidden for so long, the quiet sacrifices, the silent battles, the years of subtle manipulation, the intellectual theft. He listened intently, his eyes wide with a mixture of shock, sorrow, and dawning realization. It was a painful, raw conversation, but it was also a profoundly healing one, a fragile bridge finally being built between us, spanning the chasm of years of unspoken truths. Sarah, my pragmatic, fiercely ambitious daughter, reacted differently, her initial shock quickly transforming into a cold, almost detached fury. Her anger was not emotional, but intensely intellectual, a strategic assessment of catastrophic failure. "He's an idiot," she'd seethe over the phone, her voice sharp with a cutting contempt. How could he be so reckless? So arrogant? Does he not understand the magnitude of this? His entire legacy gone. All for what? She saw Arthur's downfall not as a moral failing, but as a monumental strategic blunder, a testament to his hubris and ultimate incompetence. She called him, not to comfort, but to castigate, to demand a logical explanation for his monumental self-destruction. Their conversation ended in a furious shouting match, a final, irreparable severing of their already strained relationship. Sarah, unlike Thomas, was not interested in emotional processing. She was interested in consequences, in the brutal arithmetic of win and loss. And the consequences for Arthur were, by any measure, catastrophic. Arthur, stripped of everything, his reputation, his career, his firm, his wife, his wealth, became a ghost in our small town. He moved into a small, nondescript, rented room above a forgotten diner on the outskirts of Riverside, his once expensive, tailored suits replaced by ill-fitting, worn clothes, his silver hair unkempt. I sometimes saw him from a distance, a hunched figure shuffling down the street, his once confident, purposeful stride replaced by a defeated, aimless shuffle. His gaze was perpetually fixed on the cracked pavement, a man utterly lost, adrift in a world he no longer recognized. He never tried to contact me again. The last vestiges of his arrogance, his entitlement, had been systematically stripped away, leaving only a hollowed-out shell. He had nothing left to say, no more lies to tell. The alimony, once the very tool of his control, the symbol of his power over my financial life, was now a mere, irrelevant footnote. The terms of the original settlement, including the drastically reduced payments, were quietly finalized, the court seeing no reason to reopen a case based on my vindictive actions, oblivious to the true, hidden game that had been played. The financial aspect of my revenge had been a mere feint, a smokescreen to mask the true, devastating blow aimed squarely at his legacy, his pride, his very identity. The money was secondary. The profound, chilling satisfaction of seeing him stripped bare, exposed for the fraud he was, his carefully constructed public image shattered beyond repair, that was the true currency of my long-awaited justice. In the quiet months that followed, I plunged back into my architectural pursuits with a renewed, almost furious vigor, a creative surge I hadn't felt in decades. My small, sunny study, once the silent battlefield of my strategic planning, transformed into a vibrant, bustling studio. I took on new commissions for local community projects, designing a beautiful, accessible wing for the Riverside Public Library, a place where knowledge could flourish, and a vibrant, sustainable youth center, a sanctuary for growth. My designs, always focused on light, on flow, on creating spaces that nurtured and uplifted, took on a new, profound meaning. It was a stark contrast to Arthur's legal battles, which had always been about erecting walls and imposing boundaries, about winning at any cost, regardless of the human price. I built while he had utterly destroyed. My relationship with Thomas flourished, growing deeper and more authentic with each passing week. He often visited, not out of obligation, but out of genuine connection, a true desire for my company. He'd sit with me in the sunroom, sharing stories from his classroom, seeking my advice on difficult students, on the complexities of history. Sometimes, he'd simply sit in comfortable, companionable silence, a quiet acknowledgement of my presence, my strength, in a way he never had before. He'd finally seen beyond the perfect veneer, recognized the quiet, formidable power that had always resided within me. It was a profound healing, a meticulous rebuilding of a bond that Arthur's actions had nearly shattered, a testament to the enduring power of truth. Thomas often spoke of his father, not with anger, but with a deep, pervasive sadness, a quiet acceptance of the flawed, broken man he truly was. "He lost everything, Mom," Thomas would say, shaking his head slowly, his gaze distant. "And it feels like he deserved it, but also, it's just so sad to see." I would nod, offering no judgment, just a quiet, profound understanding, a shared sorrow for the man he once believed his father to be. Sarah's path to reconciliation, unlike Thomas's, was far more circuitous, marked by bursts of anger and periods of detached silence. Her initial fury at Arthur, fueled by a sense of familial humiliation and strategic miscalculation, simmered for months, slowly turning inward, manifesting as a sharp, cynical edge that alienated even her closest colleagues. She buried herself in her demanding work, driving herself harder, striving for a level of success that seemed to be a desperate counter to her father's failure. Slowly, however, her calls and visits to me became more frequent, less about complaints about Arthur and more about her own internal struggles, her own existential fears. One evening, after a particularly grueling week at her firm, she confessed, her voice strained, a raw vulnerability I had rarely witnessed. "Mom, I always thought Dad was invincible. I built my whole idea of success, my entire professional identity, around him, around what he represented. Now, I don't know who I am or what I'm supposed to be chasing anymore." It was a raw, honest admission, the first true crack in her formidable, self-protective facade. I didn't offer advice, didn't attempt to fill the void with platitudes. I simply listened, a quiet, unwavering presence, a silent anchor in her stormy emotional sea. Over time, she slowly, tentatively, began to see me not as a victim or as a vindictive, destructive force, but as a woman who had navigated profound adversity with an inner compass she desperately needed to find for herself. Our relationship, once defined by the shadow of Arthur's influence, was being forged anew on a foundation of honest vulnerability, a deeper understanding that transcended past grievances and superficial triumphs. My days were now filled with a quiet, profound purpose, punctuated by small, exquisite joys. Long, contemplative walks in the riverside park, admiring the changing seasons, the resilient beauty of nature. Volunteer work at the local animal shelter, finding solace in the unconditional love of creatures who asked for nothing but kindness. Evenings spent immersed in learning, sketching new architectural designs that flowed effortlessly from my mind, or simply reading classic novels by the crackling fire, a cup of herbal tea warming my hands. The orchids in my sunroom bloomed profusely, a riot of vibrant color and delicate fragrance, a silent testament to the persistent beauty of life and the rewards of patient, meticulous care. I was no longer defined by a marriage that had stifled me, by a betrayal that had scarred me, or even by a revenge that had liberated me. I was simply Eleanor Hayes, a woman who had faced her demons, collected her dues, and emerged, not unscathed, for the scars remained, but undeniably whole, truly free and radiating a quiet, indomitable strength. As I approached my 78th birthday, surrounded by the warmth of my rediscovered passions and the loving, authentic connections with my children and grandchildren, I often reflected on the long, intricate journey. The scars of the past were still there, faint but present, a subtle tapestry woven into the fabric of my being, a constant reminder of the battles fought and the profound lessons learned. But they were no longer open, festering wounds that bled emotion. They were now simply scars, symbols of resilience, quiet testaments to an inner strength I never knew I possessed until it was forged in the crucible of betrayal and reclamation. My story had become a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a narrative of quiet triumph over profound adversity. The final word belonged to me, and in that I found true freedom. Arthur Thompson. His name, once synonymous with power, prestige, and glittering success in Riverside, faded into a cautionary whisper, a grim footnote in the town's gossipy history. He eventually moved away from Riverside to a nondescript apartment in a smaller, forgotten town far from the spotlight, living out his remaining years in quiet, bitter anonymity. I never saw him again after that day by the library, when he looked utterly broken, and, honestly, I never sought to. My purpose was fulfilled. The scales of justice, though slow, had finally, irrevocably balanced. Life, I had learned through years of silent observation and painful experience, was a series of choices, some made consciously, with clear intent, and others through quiet resignation, through the subtle erosion of one's own identity. My choice, for so many years, had been to enable Arthur's ambition, to tirelessly support his career, to sacrifice my own dreams for the illusion of a perfect family and a secure future. And when that illusion shattered, when the betrayal became undeniable, my choice transformed. It became to reclaim what was rightfully mine, not just the material assets he had so carelessly dismissed, but the dignity, the intellect, the very self that had been subsumed beneath his shadow. The revenge, if one could even call it that, wasn't about bitterness or hate, not in the end. It was about truth, about justice, about exposing the real, devastating cost of unchecked ambition and casual cruelty. It was about ensuring that his carefully constructed legacy, built on a shaky foundation of lies and exploitation, would finally crumble under the undeniable weight of its own deceit. As I began my 79th year, surrounded by the warmth of my rediscovered passions, the beauty of my thriving garden, and the loving, authentic connections with my children and grandchildren, I often reflected on the long, intricate journey. The scars of the past were still there, subtle threads in the tapestry of my life, a constant reminder of the battles fought and the profound lessons learned. But they were no longer open, festering wounds that bled emotion. They were now simply scars, symbols of resilience, quiet testaments to an inner strength I never knew I possessed until it was forged in the crucible of betrayal and reclamation. My story had become a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit, a narrative of quiet triumph over profound adversity. The final word belonged to me, and in that I found true freedom.